podcast to listen to, and really happy for you to have tuned in. My name is Greg Dent. I am your host here and the founder of Really Trusted, and Really Trusted is the one bringing you this podcast. And I am happy to be joined today by my co-founder, who happens to share my last name of all things, Daniel Dent. Welcome to the show.
Hi, good to be here.
So at the beginning of a podcast, it is customary to do a bit of a biography of the guest. And I will, I've known you for longer than anyone in the world, which should scare you a bunch, but I'll be kind and give you a bit of a professional biography today. So Daniel Dent is the CTO of Really Trusted. He is the co-founder of Really Trusted. Daniel does all of the work on the tech side of things. And if we think to his background prior to that, and we've been at this for 6 and a bit years now, actually almost 6 years to the day as I think about that. So not 6 and a bit, 6 years almost to the day. The prior to that, Daniel has always been a geek and has gotten deep into all sorts of technical things, email marketing, network management, website hosting, you name it. His life has been in front of computers. And so he is the perfect person to be the CTO of a company where I can create problems that he then has to find technical solutions to. So Daniel, with that introduction, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I wanted to do our first episode about the history of Really Trusted and the who Really Trusted is and the why Really Trusted is, because people who are going to be listening to this podcast, I hope, are going to be compliance nerds just like us, who phones ring with the 24 theme song in case people missed it. And that's okay. But my really, truly, my hope for the audience of this show is that it's going to be a bunch of compliance nerds, people who really kind of get into the weeds on anti-money laundering. And some of the topics we're going to be discussing are really into the weeds of adverse media, seized assets, the pros and cons of watch lists, like topics that are pretty AML specific, and we'll go pretty deep on some of those. But I think it'll be helpful for our audience to understand where we're coming from as a company and why we're interested in this topic. So with all of that, I thought I'd ask you to kind of give us a 2 to 3 minute version of the history of what Really Trusted is, who we are, and what we're doing out there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to start by talking about the name, because I think the name actually talks about who we are as a company and how we got started. Really Trusted. Why is that word trust in there? And it comes from when the real estate industry lost public confidence in British Columbia. The government stepped in and said, you guys are not doing a good enough job of regulating yourself. We're taking over.
Yep.
And as part of that process, they introduced a bunch of disclosure and paperwork requirements. And we were chatting one day. You've been a successful, busy agent for some time now. And there's the conversation I remember you having with me before it happens, saying, what are they doing? This is going to introduce so much friction. How am I going to do business?
Yep.
And that was kind of where it started, with a single form where it was like, I need to be able to fill out this form before I can talk to a customer. That is a major point of friction for me. And how can we make this easier? And, that's at the core of our company in a lot of different ways. Because we are agent focused. We're starting from the perspective of the customer. You were our first customer.
Right.
Then it was your team, then it was people at your brokerage, people in a sphere that we knew. But, going back to that initial thing about the loss of trust, what the government forced down everybody's throats, whether they wanted it or not, was the beginning of the process of creating processes that create accountability and that allow the public, the consumer, to start to have confidence that everything is on the up and up. And I'm speaking in really broad terms here, but that foundationally, I think, speaks to kind of how we got where we are today as a company.
Right. So if I could distill that, I think, and that's probably a pretty good explanation, in fact, of why the name and what we generally believe. And I think if I could tease out a few of those, and there, some of these are in our mission statement and our vision and our core values for that matter, depending on which of the points I'm making here, but conceptually around making it easier for professionals to fulfill their regulatory obligations has been really one of the foundational principles for us. But doing that in a customer-centric way, and by the way, that's actually the mission statement of Really Trusted, is to make it easier for professionals to fulfill their regulatory obligations. I think we've got the words technologically underserved professionals, but conceptually anyhow. But doing it in a customer-centric way, and that's actually one of our core values, is making sure that all of our stuff is customer-centric. And honesty is also one of those core values, and that comes back to the trust and making sure that we're helping professionals establish a trustful relationship or trusting relationship with their clients, and creating, in our case, a regulatory, or helping them with their regulatorily required obligations, but doing it so that it's easier for them to do that. I think, if I were to distill it all. Is that kind of what you were saying there? Yeah. No, that makes sense. So that certainly speaks to the foundation of the company and the underpinnings and the core values I touched on a little bit there. I think in my next question, you might be able to unpack one of the other core values. I'll see if you can get there. But what do we do today, and how did we get to there? And why did we get to there?
So I mean, these days, we're all about anti-money laundering. And I mean, really, we got there from talking to our customers, from recognizing that actually the disclosure forms that we started out dealing with were a small problem compared to all of their anti-money laundering obligations, which when we started, I'm not sure if anybody in the industry was really paying attention to those obligations. There was maybe there were some people. If so, I don't think we ever ran into them.
There's an argument that some people still aren't within the real estate industry, but that's a whole other conversation, a whole different episode. I've got a whole episode on that coming.
But, when we started, the conversation was, hey, build this app to take the information on the driver's license and stamp it on a form. And that's it.
Yeah.
And if you do anything more than that, you're complicating our lives.
And if you ask a real estate agent, in some cases today still, I'd like to think not at the brokerages we serve, but at some other brokerages, if you ask them what FINTRAC is, they'll see it as that form that they have to fill out with the ID information, which is such a lack of clarity of the importance of the whole thing that it's almost funny to me now, but sadly it is still the belief that many in the real estate industry have at this point, I think.
Yeah.
The core value I was hoping you'd get to was thoughtful leadership, and you touched on it, but I'll put it out there and let you kind of expand on it a little bit from there.
Yeah. So we've had, and as you say, still have a lot of customers where the thing that brought them to the app was it makes their life easier. And what we've been able to do with that is say, yes, anytime we can, we're going to make your life easier. And we're especially going to try to design the app in a way that makes it easier for you to do the right thing. And makes it easier for us to lead you down the path towards regulatory compliance.
Yeah. So what I really want to touch on there, and you said it, but I want to be really explicit about what you said, and because I think it's super important, is that we do want to make it easier for people to do their jobs, but we also want to put them into a position where they're better able to comply and fulfill their obligations in a way that puts the whole industry, or at least the ones using our services, in a position where they're actually fulfilling their obligations in a more real way. Is that a reasonable reframe of what you're trying to say there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I want to belabor that point for a second, because ultimately one of the things that I keep saying, certainly internally and really externally, if anybody will listen to me, is that FINTRAC isn't about filling out forms. And anybody who thinks that you can have a compliant program just by filling out the form just hasn't understood their obligations. And we've, as a company, have done a ton of education and webinars and conversations about that topic. And sometimes people get it, but sometimes I feel like I'm screaming into the wind on that one. Yeah.
But I'd also say that the conversation has shifted rapidly in the last 6 months, especially.
I would say it's been about a year, but yeah, thank goodness for that. Actually, yeah, you're right. It's maybe more than 6 months, but yeah, thank goodness, I would say too. No, knowing what I know today and understanding the importance of I'm going to have a bunch, any realtor who was listening up to this point is probably about to turn it off when I say knowing and understanding the importance of FINTRAC. That's the, okay, I'm done with that podcast message right there. But bear with me for a second here, because I actually do think that there's a case here that I think is important for everybody to hear, which is that it's really important for our society. It's really important for our businesses. It's really important for, in my case, from me personally, my ethical beliefs, that we do this properly. And all of those things, to me, all three of those things are valid reasons to make FINTRAC. I don't think it has to be a priority. You're a realtor. Your priority should be to sell houses. Let's be very clear about that. But I do think I have a hard time believing that based on all three of those things, you wouldn't, as a realtor, want to at least do a good job of your FINTRAC obligations. Does that jive?
Yeah, it does. I think there's something you're touching on there that is really hard for most people to see unless they spend a ton of time digging into things, which is that they are part of a machine. They are a cog in a very large machine. And the consequences of doing a process in an effective way that leads to suspicious transaction reports being filed, that leads to people choosing not to even try to do transactions because they know that if they were to try to, it would not lead to a result they want. These are things that have downstream impacts that are completely invisible to us.
Yeah.
Occasionally we have like little windows, but most of it either because law enforcement, to protect their case, doesn't want to share because they're still building the case, or because there's a case that never happens. There's people who are not getting trafficked as a result of these processes. There are people that are not losing their homes. There are people that are not getting extorted, or the extortion is ending. There's all these things which are like horrific parts of our society that we don't like to look at too closely, but that happen, that are being prevented by the simple act of, hey, this is weird, I'm going to fill out this form.
Well, that is the perfect segue. I could not have asked for a more perfect segue, in fact, into a bit of a teaser. And, in podcast world and in any sort of a performance, that you're supposed to have teasers, right? So here, that is the perfect teaser for a bunch of our coming episodes, where at least two of the episodes where I can think of conversations I've had or will be having, where we go through actual real life examples of suspicious transaction reports that were filed and or the repercussions of those suspicious transaction reports that were filed. So stay tuned. And I think you're absolutely right. It is one of the questions I continually hear from real estate agents from compliance officers within the real estate sector as well, honestly. So what? We send out all of these reports, and what is the end result? And on this show, I'm going to try and unpack a little bit of that in some of our episodes, because it is a question that I know people have. So do come back. If you're still listening to us 15 minutes into this first episode and you're still here, I think you'll probably come back. But if for no other reason, I'm giving you a reason now. We will be talking about some really specific stuff of examples that I think will be helpful. So what else do you think people need to know about either Really Trusted and or the KYC podcast as we kind of roll this out and allow people to talk about and invite people to come have conversations about compliance and anti-money laundering?
Oh, that's a great question. I think one of the other things that we really try hard as a company to do is we try to have that close relationship with our customers. You were the original user of our app, and that made it a lot easier for us to have that be part of the process, because the real estate industry, the nature of it is that agents tend to know each other and build those relationships over time. And I think as we've grown, that's something that we're really cognizant of. And our entire product development process, it doesn't matter what industry we're talking about, we're always making a point of doing our best to be part of the conversation, to be solving things both from the perspective of the regulator and kind of what is the actual legislation here, what's the public policy purpose, and then also from the perspective of, okay, what does that look like for the person on the ground? And I think we've got a unique perspective in a lot of cases where, we've seen regulations come down the pipe where, because of our connection to the professionals that are actually dealing with the public, that are performing the service, sometimes we've ended up seeing things that aren't even necessarily obvious to the regulator. And so that's, I think, an important part of who we are as a company and something that we strive to continue to lean into.
Yeah, that's an interesting point for sure. I think, when I think about the products that we've launched in the last couple of years, ignoring the app, and certainly the app has been led by that, but the other products we've developed, the RT Academy platform, the RT Manuals platform, and ultimately rolling that all up into FINTRAC Express, all of those were very much in response to this need that we saw from compliance officers at Canadian real estate brokerages through conversation after conversation, where it became clear that they wanted to comply. And that has been the message I've heard the most. But for the most part, they don't know how. And that's, I think that's encouraging, but also really an important part of our fabric and who we are, kind of thing.
And, it makes sense that they don't know how. It really does. Like, these regulations, if you look at how they started and kind of where they started from the assumption of big conglomerate businesses, big six banks, companies that have the resources to dedicate teams to these processes.
Well, I don't know if you've been watching the FINTRAC fines lately, but those big banks haven't been doing all that well either at these big processes.
Yeah, no, it's true. And that speaks to how challenging it is. I mean, look,
yeah, I hear you.
We've got an entire company here of people that do this day in, day out, and it keeps us busy. And that is all we're doing, is making sure that we do our best to understand all of this and build products in accordance with that. For a small business, which is most real estate brokers, which is most mortgage brokers, which is
like 99% of them, if not 99.9% of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, even if they can afford to hire somebody whose full-time job it is to do this, which, let's be clear, they can't. That's just not. It's not going to work financially.
Yeah.
But even if they could, for that one person to then go out and put in an effective compliance program, still a challenge. And I think the fact that we're fundamentally allowing the industry to pool its resources, because I mean, it's in a very indirect way, but we have a whole bunch of different, like we have over 500 brokerages using our software now, right?
Oh, we're probably into the 7 or 8s at this point, actually, but yes.
Yeah. So there's leverage that all of our customers get from the fact that, we're serving all of those customers. We don't just have to recoup that investment with 10 agents. We can do that over tens of thousands of agents.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And that makes sense to me. And I think that's kind of the what we've certainly tried to do is to bring the best practice. And again, if I were to dilute what you've just said, we're bringing the best practices to all of our customers because we have access to all of our customers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've definitely seen situations where somebody's like, hey, I want to do this thing. And we're like, ooh, we've seen somebody do this thing. Here's why you don't want to do this thing. Yeah. And they don't need to know who did that. They don't need, like, the fact that we can just give them reasons why it's a bad idea or why something's a good idea. Yeah. There's both. The best practices can cross-pollinate within the industry. And I think that leads to a result that is good for everybody.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Absolutely. Okay. Well, we don't have much time left. Is there any parting things that you wanted to make sure that you had said before we wrap this episode of the Know Your Compliance podcast?
I think just like, as you said at the beginning, we're 6 years in. I have a lot of gratitude for our customers, and I think it's important to share that. It is unusual to see some of the messages that we get of like thanks and appreciation for what we do. Mm-hmm. And, I just want to really, really tell people what a difference that makes. We're a small company, we're a small team, and it's nice to be serving customers that appreciate us. So, yeah.
I would echo that statement. So for both of you who are still listening at this point in the episode, thank you very much, both for your support of this show and for your support of Really Trusted. I can think of no better way to end episode number 1 of the KYC podcast. Thank you very much for joining us today, Daniel.
Great. Looking forward to being back at some point, I'm sure.
I would imagine so. I can't get rid of you yet.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Know Your Compliance podcast. If you'd like more information about our guests, have a story idea, or want to be a guest, please reach out to hello@kycpodcast.com. If you want to discuss your anti-money laundering compliance needs with a member of the Really Trusted team, go to www.reallytrusted.com/consult.